Sharper than a serpent's tooth. Written by the Hanged Man 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 47. Interning with Eraserhead. Internships Start.
Well, this week was going to be a disaster, and it hadn't even started yet. First of all was the fact that both of his students were late to their meetup. Something he'd planned for, but hadn't quite expected. As it was, they barely made it on the train. And only then did Shouta notice exactly how light Suzuki was traveling. He'd told them to pack enough for the week, and it looked like she only had her costume case and her backpack. Great. Shouta knew that Suzuki didn't exactly have spending money before, but he'd hoped with the extra yen she'd been awarded that she'd be able to address that issue. Second, they were already exhausted, and the day had barely begun. Had neither of them slept? Shinsou dozed on and off during their train ride, but Suzuki seemed twitchier than ever before, constantly checking the doors, and even twisting around to look behind them when she thought he wasn't looking. There was a jerkiness to her motions that belied a deeper anxiety, one he didn't understand in the slightest. She lived alone in a rundown apartment. Surely she wasn't homesick. By the time they made it to the place he'd rented out in Hosu, he felt like his nerves were shot from her constant twitching. Being an underground pro meant he had to pick up on subtle cues, and sitting around someone so uneasy for that long had a tendency to wear at him. Still, Suzuki seemed to calm as they left the train and neared the apartment, the tension easing from her shoulders when Shouta finally let them through the door. The place was sparse, but that was to be expected. It had enough. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. For its size, the price was exorbitant, but given that he was only going to be here for a week, and the police department was footing most of the bill in exchange for his work on the hero killer case, Shouta wasn't too worried about that. What he was worried about, however, was problem number 3. Dinner was fast approaching, and the kitchen wasn't exactly stocked. Shinsou suggested they just order pizza, which was fine by him. He hadn't planned on cooking much this internship anyway. The kitchen would probably catch on fire the moment he stepped foot in there. Baking he could do. Baking had rules, damn it. Cooking? Absolutely not. Him and open flames did not mix. Suzuki glanced up from where she had settled on the couch, rifling absently through her hero gear, which was definitely something she should not have been messing with on the living room table. God damn. I don't think I've ever had pizza. Shinsou turned towards her, brow raised. Seriously? Never? She shrugged, not looking up from her gear. My family was very traditional. So what? You never went out with your friends or something? Suzuki snorted. Hitoshi, do I look like the kind of person who had friends? They bickered back and forth for a moment, as Shouta sighed and searched his phone for the closest, most adequate pizza place. He tried to keep his mind from wandering too much, but... Traditional family. Was that a clue, or was it just another lie she'd thrown in to make herself seem less odd? If that was just a euphemism for her parents being strict or even abusive, it could explain the desire to completely cut herself off from them. Or maybe he was overthinking it. The point of this wasn't to dissect every single thing that Suzuki said. It was to observe and, hopefully, get her to open up a little more. Most of all, though, they were here for training. And Shouta couldn't teach them to the best of his ability if he was constantly scrutinizing Suzuki. By the time the pizza got there, he was already exhausted. And he still had a full night of patrol ahead of him. Couldn't be helped. Not like the schedule was much different from a normal school day. He set the box down on the table. Suzuki had, thankfully, moved her costume case to the bedroom. All right, so here's how this is going to go. I'm patrolling tonight. No, neither of you are coming with me, he added when both kids made as if to speak. Not the first night. Patrolling as an underground hero isn't the same as with daylight heroes. It's a lot more dangerous. With daylight heroes, it's about the image as much as anything else. Just your presence is enough to deter most villains. Isn't fighting villains what we're training to do? Asked Suzuki. She was still eyeing the pizza box carefully, even after Shinsou took his own slice and began to dig in. A better opportunity for us to learn, then. Not on the first day. If I find your progress acceptable, I might take you on patrols later. That was a lie. Suzuki was obviously more than capable, and honestly, Shinsou had made incredible strides in his own training. He expected to let them accompany him after a couple of days, when he'd laid more of the groundwork for his investigation. Suzuki, predictably, huffed at this, but didn't challenge it any further. Instead, she just took a slice herself, still handling it with caution, as if she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Shinsou noticed this and snorted. Just eat it. It's not a bomb. Look, not all of us have the same life experience, Suzuki snapped, her voice surprisingly harsh for Shinsou's light-hearted jab. Are her nerves still getting to her? Shouta thought she'd relaxed upon entering the apartment, but maybe she was just better at hiding it. Do you know how to pour drinks properly? Do you know how to do a tea ceremony? Do you? Why would I be asking that if I didn't? Suzuki tapped her fingers against the table restlessly, and Shouta caught her shooting a couple of subtle glances towards the window. It suddenly struck him that, if she was this anxious, she probably wouldn't fall asleep. He'd already heard Shinsou complain about his own insomnia, which meant... Oh, great. Wonderful. He was going to have to invite Hizashi over to counterbalance the sheer exhaustion that would no doubt take up residence in the apartment. One thing at a time. Listen up. I'm going out, and I probably won't be back until 5. Do not, under any circumstances, leave this apartment. Suzuki raised her hand. What if the apartment's on fire? Then you can leave. What if someone breaks into... Unless remaining inside puts you in active danger, do not leave the apartment, Shouta said through gritted teeth. I'll be back at 5, and I plan on sleeping until noon. I'm going to wake you up, you're going to get ready, eat breakfast, and then go to the gym and run through the usual workout routine. I'll meet you there. Wouldn't it be more efficient if you were on the same sleep cycle? Suzuki, I appreciate your input, but you aren't the teacher here. I'll give you both further instruction when we meet up tomorrow. Suzuki stared at him, and he caught the slightest tension in her shoulders that slowly dissipated when it became clear he wasn't going to say anything else. Shouta sighed, standing to grab his capture scarf and goggles. It was like walking on eggshells with that kid, as if she were constantly waiting for the moment, the final push that would have him turn on her. I'm heading out. Please, sleep. He shouldn't have wasted his breath. Returning from patrol and opening the door to the apartment, he was immediately greeted by the sight of Shinsou, curled up around his phone on the couch, cheek pressed awkwardly against the cushions as he lightly snored. Obviously, he'd been there all night, although someone had haphazardly thrown a blanket over his shoulders. And Suzuki... If he hadn't installed sensors on the windows, he'd have suspected that she went out a sparrow. As it was, he pushed open the door to their bedroom to find her sitting on her bed, laptop open in front of her, as she slowly, but methodically, chugged an energy drink. She had the audacity to look him in the eye, blinking up at him before glancing back down at her computer, as if to check the time. Good morning, Sensei. Shouta sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was far too late, early, for this. Suzuki, how long have you been up? Humming thoughtfully, Suzuki closed her computer with a snap and downed the rest of her energy drink in one swift motion, throwing the empty can back into her bag before pulling out another one and cracking it open. She slipped off the bed and passed him into the hallway. Did you have a nice patrol? I asked you a question. She paused, glancing at him warily over her shoulder, as she began sipping the second drink. Shouta felt his nose wrinkle in disgust. You're going to give yourself a heart attack. Suzuki just snorted, shoulders dropping slightly, as she turned away again and continued walking down the hallway. You should sleep. An ache clawing its way through his temples suggested that she was right. Not that he'd ever admit it. He followed her into the living room, failing to suppress a smirk as Suzuki finished the second drink and tossed the empty can at Shinsou, who groaned and rolled off the couch, hitting the ground with a thud. Shouta leaned against the wall, pressing a fist to his forehead. You were up all night. So were you. Funny how that works. Suzuki, you need to sleep. You can't train like this. False. Shouta groaned, glancing over to where Shinsou was sitting up and blinking blarily at the blanket he was tangled up in. His voice was sleep-rasped, and his already wild hair was pressed at an odd angle. When did I fall asleep? Around 2, answered Suzuki. You were watching a video or something. I turned it off. Oh. Shinsou shuffled on the blanket, as if still trying to comprehend where it came from. Thanks? No problem. Sensei, you should go to sleep. We'll meet you at the gym? Somehow, she'd procured another energy drink. Those things weren't small, and must have had at least a serving of caffeine each. Probably more given the size. Shouta walked forward and made to snatch it out of her hands before she could open it. With an agility that shouldn't have been surprising, Suzuki ducked and spun away, clutching the can against her chest and staring back at him through narrowed eyes. What was that for? How much caffeine is in those? Suzuki glanced down at the label, grimacing before she popped open the can and made to chug it down. Shouta reached for it again, and she spluttered as she hastily dodged, darting around the counter that divided the kitchen and the living room. How much, Suzuki? Who can say? Suzuki. Aizawa-sensei? What is that monstrosity you're drinking? Shinsou had decided to join them, leaning against the counter with a yawn before furrowing his brow. Oh, that's disgusting. Those things are like 3 coffees in one. Traitor, said Suzuki, taking another sip as Shouta felt his headache spike. I knew I should have just bought the caffeine shots. Less conspicuous. That is not the problem here. Was this kid actually going to have a heart attack? He'd been mostly exaggerating before, but that was 9 servings of caffeine in what, 5 minutes? That couldn't be healthy. And then it occurred to him that she was definitely using her prize money to buy this garbage instead of, clothes, maybe. Keeping his tone even was a struggle. Suzuki, how often do you drink 3 of these things in a morning? She shrugged. It's not always this brand. I get what I can, you know. This is not a normal amount of caffeine for a 15-year-old to be consuming. And that was coming from him, Aizawa Shouta, the man who basically subsisted solely on coffee and jelly packets, was lecturing his student on proper nutrition. Hizashi can never find out about this. Suzuki hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Caffeine doesn't really... I have a tolerance. I need to drink this much if I want to feel anything. She was trying to play it off as something normal, but as a habitual coffee drinker, Shouta knew that 9 servings was too extreme for a simple tolerance. Regeneration. Shouta hadn't even considered the implications of that, beyond basic recovery from her physical injuries, but if her body also processed toxins faster than average, then that would explain her resistance to caffeine. It also revealed a whole host of new potential problems, because what else is she resistant to? Midnight's Quirk? Certain kinds of medicine? Anesthetic? Fuck. She hated hospitals. She was afraid of hospitals. Could that have something to do with it? Nope. He wasn't dealing with this right now. Shouta sighed heavily, feeling exhaustion tug at his limbs and press against the inside of his skull. He began to shuffle back down the hallway towards his bedroom. Go to the gym. Go through your routines. I'll meet you there. Sleep well, sensei, called Suzuki sweetly, and Shouta dragged a hand across his face with a groan. Brat. The worst part was, he knew there was no way to pay her back in training. She liked running laps. It was downright unnatural. Well, hopefully, that tenacity would come in handy on patrol. Or bite him in the ass. Either way.
End of chapter 47.